So I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists today. We have Mauricio Guetta. He's a lawyer at Instituto Socioambiental based in Brazil. Welcome, Mauricio. We have Meg Symington, Managing Director of Amazon at World Wildlife Fund. Welcome, Meg.
Hi.
We have Natalie Unterstell. She's President at Instituto Talanoa based in Brazil. Welcome, Natalie. And we may have joining at the end of the session, depending on his prior commitments, Dr. Carlos Nobre, who's a senior researcher at the Institute for Advanced Studies at University of Sao Paulo and a noted Amazon scientist. So we will know a little bit later in the session whether Dr. Nobre will be joining us or not. So we have a great panel today full of experts based in Brazil, as well as based in the US, to provide their perspectives on Brazil-US cooperation and what they hope that the upcoming meeting on February 10th between President Lula and Biden may be able to catalyze both announcements at that meeting and catalyze for the year ahead. So I'll make a few opening remarks now, just looking at what some civil society organizations are hoping will come out of this meeting and what they would like to see in the year ahead for US-Brazil cooperation. In preparation for the meeting between President Biden and Lula, 15 environmental and climate organizations put together a set of recommendations and sort of key outcomes that we would like to see coming out of this meeting. I think the main overarching point is that this meeting between President Biden and Lula is really an unprecedented opportunity for two of the world's most forested and biodiverse countries to change the trajectory of global deforestation and destruction, particularly for the Amazon region. So civil environment and climate organizations, really want to see that this meeting between President Biden and Lula prioritize climate, human rights, and deforestation. There are interlinked conservation and stewardship of forests issues. Those conservation of forests and stewardship can address interlinked crisis of climate, biodiversity, and human rights. And the two governments can really work together to make progress on these issues to avoid ecological tipping points and to meet forest and climate commitments. So at the heart of these recommendations, the first is to commit to work together to halt and reverse deforestation as soon as possible and no later than 2030. And this is also something that's been called for by the Glasgow Declaration on Forests and Land Use. So it is consistent with international commitments. Specifically, civil society organizations are urging the leaders to think through how to meet that commitment to halt and reverse deforestation through several sub-objectives. And the first would be to address the issue of commodity-driven deforestation, particularly for cattle and soy, which are currently major causes of deforestation. And this is possible through regulatory and technological solutions. The US has a role as a major importer of forest risk commodities, including timber, leather, and beef. Therefore, the US should push for legislation to avoid importing commodities grown on deforested land. And the Biden administration definitely has an opportunity to show leadership in this area. Similarly, the two countries can work together to allow more robust traceability of where these commodities are being grown in Brazil and whether they've been grown on illegally obtained or deforested land. And this could involve work by the Brazilian government as well as work by the US government to support Brazil in those efforts through technology or finance. And similarly, the two countries should work together to end corruption and illegality in the natural resource sector. Illegal deforestation is rampant in the Amazon, and the US can fully implement the Lacey Act to make sure that the US addresses the illegal timber trade and is not importing illegally sourced timber. So I'll just run over a few more asks from civil society for this meeting, and then we'll turn it over to the panelists. Additional important asks are to catalyze the appropriate financial resources. So this is important for halting and reversing deforestation and to make sure that the agencies in Brazil that are charged with forest protection are fully funded and can recover from being dismantled during the Bolsonaro administration. Similarly, the US has made a $9 billion pledge for global forests that need to be met. Civil society would also emphasize that this meeting should explicitly mention and champion the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, who are also and often the most effective environmental stewards and are on the front lines against deforestation. And then lastly, we'd certainly like to see more commitments from President Lula on what can be done to protect and restore forests. So this could include committing to ensure that 80% of the Amazon is protected by 2025 from deforestation and degradation to avoid a tipping point, to enforce and strengthen the implementation of the forest code, and to accelerate legal designation of unallocated public lands, including as indigenous territories and protected areas. So those are some of the key, both high level and technical inputs from largely US-based civil society to this meeting. We'll hear from the rest of the panelists how they are viewing this upcoming meeting between Biden and Lula and how the US can cooperate in the year ahead. So first we will hear from Mauricio, and then we'll hear from Meg Symington. Third, we'll hear from Natalie Unterstell. Natalie, I'll note, has also just published a policy brief, which has over 20 recommendations for steps that the US and Biden administration and Lula administration can take together. So we'll hear from Natalie on that. And then potentially at the end, we'll hear from Carlos Nobre. So thank you so much, and a welcome to all of you in the audience, and a welcome to our panelists. We'll start with Mauricio. Mauricio, I have 3 questions for you. The first is, could you provide us an update on Brazil's political outlook? Will Lula struggle to implement his agenda with Brazil's current Congress? Are there legislative efforts that we here in the US should be monitoring in Brazil?
Yes, sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. Actually, such as in the US, I think in Brazil, we have a huge challenge with far right that is getting stronger. So I think this is a scenario within the Congress. So I think the first challenge is to have votes to approve improvements of our legislation. And on the other hand, I think there's a huge challenge to avoid setbacks that are running on the Congress. So we have such as 10 bills that we monitor with priority. Of course, there are hundreds of bills to impose setbacks in our legislation, but these 10 bills, I think that we call the destruction package, it can influence in a negative way all the efforts that both government can do to fight against social environmental problems, mainly to fight against deforestation. So first one, I think there is a huge setback that is about environmental licensing. So ISA and Federal University of Minas Gerais, we made a technical study that shows that if this bill goes on and be approved, we won't be able to fulfill our climate goals, because it will incentivize the deforestation of the Amazon forest. I think so. This is a huge setback that is running on the Senate. It was approved by the Chamber of Deputies, and all of this last 10 years we're trying to avoid its approval. I think that there are 2 main bills against indigenous rights. So one of them was created and proposed by Bolsonaro, So it's the Bill 191 from 2020. And the proposal is to open indigenous territories to all kinds of impact activities, such as mining, agriculture, and oil and gas, and others. So this is a huge problem that we are facing, and we are achieving to avoid its approval. So there are also bills that try to put setbacks on the forest code that Diana mentioned. That this is very important. So all of these bills can put some huge, immense difficulties on both efforts, Brazil and US, to fight against these social environmental problems.
Great. Thank you so much for that answer to the first question, Mauricio. And I'll quickly mention also that for those of you that are attending the webinar, feel free to put questions in the chat. There should be a question and answer box at the bottom of the Zoom screen. So Mauricio, the second question is about the Yanomami. The Yanomami people have been in the news in the past few weeks. Could you tell us a little bit about what's happening there and what is needed to prevent this from happening again?
Well, this is an old problem that we are facing. Actually, mining within Yanomami territory, it's an old issue that we always try to resolve. But I can say that in the last 4 years, this problem has turned to a humanitarian crisis. So with genocide efforts by the last government. Now, President Lula and his team are trying to propose a new legislative efforts to guarantee the regularity of the gold production chain. And I think this is a very important effort. Of course, the government will face some challenges on the Congress to approve this bill, because as I said, the far right is very strong in the moment. So it won't be easy to approve these measures. But I think there's an effort that is being done, and this is very important. And I think it's very important too from the US and other countries to improve its legislation to guarantee this chain of gold that is just legal gold, because main of the gold that is sold by Brazil, it's not legal. So I think this other countries can play an important role to fight against this issue. And of course, I think a third way that is very important to be taken, and especially in this that should be discussed in this meeting, is how to strengthen local communities and indigenous organizations, such as APIB, the Indigenous People Association of Brazil, and other organizations such as Rutucara Yanomami Association, that play a very important role to solve this problem. So it is not possible to fight against this problem just giving money to the government, such as Amazon Fund. This is very important, but I think money has to go also and to these local communities, because they are facing these challenges, and they are fighting almost alone. So this is a very important point that I wanted to register.
Great. Thank you, Mauricio. So you've definitely given us some great context of the current congressional situation in Brazil, as well as the situation facing the Yanomami, some ideas of how funding can help support Indigenous peoples. Is there anything else you'd like to add? How can countries like the US work well with Brazil to support Indigenous communities and environmental defenders in Brazil?
But I think besides the financing, that is very important, of course, it is very necessary to make advance on this legislation to help Brazil to control all the chain of forest products. So native wood, for example, there was a huge case of native wood, illegal selling of native wood that was discovered by FBI in the US, and this case also generated two criminal process in Brazil against the ex-minister of the environment, Ricardo Salles, and he left the government because of this case. So this is an example how these measures are very, very important. We know that Europe is trying to make efforts to approve this kind of legislation, gold, native wood, and other products. So I think this is a very important measure to be done by countries that want to be part of Brazil.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mauricio. And again, if anyone in the audience has questions, please use the Q&A function in the Zoom screen. Next, we'll go to Meg Symington. Meg, could you tell us a little bit about how has WWF been working with communities threatened by deforestation and land theft in the Amazon?
Sure. Thank you, Diana. It's great to be here. And I just want to say this is such an unprecedented opportunity to reignite the excellent collaboration the US government and the Brazilian government have had over the years on climate and Amazon forest conservation. I'm very excited about this. After 4 years in the wilderness, so to speak, we have a moment here where we can really seize the day. I want to build on what Mauricio said about getting funds and technical support and partnerships and investment to the people that are on the front lines, Indigenous peoples and local communities that are fighting the fight against illegal land grabbing and deforestation. We need to get those funds to them as soon as possible in ways. One project that WWF has been working on over the last 4 or 5 years is getting Indigenous organizations the equipment and the training they need in order to monitor their own territories using drones and remote sensing so that they can bring cases of illegal deforestation to the authorities. We've piloted this in the Uruguay territory in Rondônia, and it's now being rolled out in 20 different territories in both Rondônia and Mato Grosso and Acre. So this is something that with the technology we have today and with training and equipment, these peoples can protect their own lands very effectively. So that's one example of a good use of resources to fight this problem.
Great. And then you mentioned, Meg, you know, what the opportunity is. We have a great opportunity with the potential for US and Brazil cooperation. So heading into this meeting between the two presidents and looking to cooperation in the years ahead, what should the US be considering when thinking about how to help the Brazilian government and deforestation?
So I'd say there are sort of 4 major buckets of work that that should be the focus of this, bringing down deforestation and degradation. First of all, and this is mainly work that will be carried out by the Amazon Fund, but rebuilding the institutions that are needed for enforcement to stop illegal deforestation. Over the last 4 years, the previous administration in Brazil effectively dismantled, cut budgets and cut staff from the institutions that are responsible for enforcing the law against deforestation and land grabbing. So those institutions need to be rebuilt. Second, we need to strengthen and build on programs like the Amazon Region Protected Areas Program, which WWF has been working on for the last 20 years. ARPA, as it's known, supports effective management of conservation units in the Brazilian Amazon. And a paper has just come out today, actually, in Biological Conservation, showing the impact of ARPA on bringing down deforestation over the last 15 years. We see a real opportunity for the US-Brazil partnership to align public, private, multilateral, and philanthropic institutions in a coordinated arrangement to support large-scale conservation initiatives and long-term conservation in the Amazon and in other critical ecosystems as well, like the Cerrado and the Pantanal. So third, support, as I mentioned before, directly supporting Indigenous peoples for the management and sustainable development of their territories would be a third measure. And fourth, which you mentioned at the top of the webinar, is legislation to prevent importation of commodities that are coming from illegally deforested land. The EU deforestation regulation is a key step. We need to now pass similar legislation for the United States. And US leadership is essential here. We have a US version of this bill. It's the Bipartisan Forest Act, which will allow us to break the link between the products we import and consume every day and illegal deforestation in the Amazon. And I think you also mentioned, Diana, the Lacey Act, which is also another tool we have against illegal timber importation. So those are what I say: rebuild the institutions, strengthen and build on large-scale programs like ARPA, support Indigenous peoples directly to manage their territories, and then break the link between importation of commodities and deforestation.
Great, that's a great list. So one last question for you, Meg. How can the efforts, including the ones you mentioned, bring ending deforestation to scale, and can those last beyond Lula's presidency?
Well, that's always the big question, right? We need to have mechanisms, financial mechanisms in place that can go beyond one individual administration. We've learned that lesson very well over the last 4 years. We need to involve civil society organizations and build their capacity so that they can take over and really have the ability to fight illegal deforestation. So that would be my answer would be set up the long-term financial mechanisms, build the capacity in civil society and in Indigenous peoples organizations so that they can run the show. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for your contributions, Meg. Next, we'll go to Natalie, Natalie Unterstell. So it's an exciting week. The meeting between Biden and Lula has the potential to set in motion ongoing cooperation. What ideas and recommendations listed in your policy brief do you think are the most important, and why?
Thank you, Diana. Thank you for having me. And I'm also very excited. I think this is an unprecedented opportunity, like Mag said, and especially because we have this opportunity to revivify the cooperation between the two nations on climate and forests in different terms, I would say, than the conversations and negotiations that happened in the past 4 years. So just a bit of a context before going into the proposals and suggestions we made. This meeting will be happening against the backdrop of having these two countries trying to prove themselves before the international community when it comes to climate. The US is still trying to restore its credibility with international community in terms of climate diplomacy and particularly climate finance. And at the same time, Brazil, now with the new government, needs to restore its reputation as environmental steward. So both countries really need and want to cooperate and also to lead globally on this matter. So I think to start with, we should be expecting that at this first official encounter between Biden and Lula, in his third term as president, that both countries, both leaders can jointly commit to ending global deforestation, by the way, ending tropical deforestation globally by 2030, in line with the Glasgow Declaration on Forest and so on. So I think this is the first and perhaps the clearest expectation that one can have, and that might be fulfilled by this meeting. As we also know, this meeting will be between the presidents and not necessarily having the Minister for the Environment and Climate from Brazil, nor Kerry. So it's really about one-on-one between Biden and Lula. So we are not expecting a lot of details coming out of this, but still it's the beginning of something that can become a very fruitful cooperation in the coming years. And then there are many levels for this cooperation to be established and for opportunities, right? So at least at the bilateral, then we have the global level, and also very importantly, beyond the federal government's cooperation, there is a lot of opportunities as well. So I just want to touch upon each of these layers of opportunities so that we cover a bit of ground here. So on the bilateral cooperation between Brazil and the US, I think it's very important to take into account that climate finance is a key. Biden has pledged in the past, when he was a candidate, and then when he inaugurated his government, that he would raise $20 billion US dollars to protect forests all over the world, and particularly the Amazon. And as you said, Diana, this needs to be met. Now it's the time to really deliver, as Bolsonaro is not standing on the way of the forest anymore. So we are kind of moving from a zero forest policy to a zero deforestation policy here with Lula. So now it's the time. So first of all, it's absolutely critical that President Biden commit to his campaign promise and actually deliver the resources commensurate with that pledge. And now comes something very important, which is how to deliver that, not only what, right? So we're not talking about millions, we're talking about billions. And secondly, how. Brazil has its own ideas. It's important that US understand our priorities, the priorities of President Lula and Minister Marina Silva in particular, and then respond to the priorities with ambition and urgency. And one of the things that it's quite clear at the moment is that Brazil is already underway to restore the Amazon Fund as one of its main financial vehicles. It's not the only, like Mauricio said, but it's a very important one. And until now, or historically, the US has not been a partner. So we had Norway, we had Germany, and it would be absolutely important that US pledge to join the Amazon Fund at this point, even if it's not starting with billions, but the symbolism of that, it's quite critical. There are other opportunities related to the bilateral climate finance cooperation that we are highlighting, for instance, involving private sectors. So the International Development Finance Corporation, the DFC that Diana already mentioned, also can prioritize Brazil and particularly the Amazon in its strategies. So this is another important thing, because the Amazon region should not only be seen, as a place for philanthropies, which is great. We need the philanthropies, we need the grants, but also we need the private sector aligned with the goal of zeroing deforestation during this decade. So this is also a critical piece. And then talking a little bit, I won't get into the more than 20 recommendations that we've done, but in terms of the global arena, there are also many opportunities for the two countries to cooperate or to lead together. For instance, we are asking actually Biden to engage with the G7 to actually get the G7 members to mobilize, actually to commit future climate finance to protect the Amazon and other tropical forests. So we see that the G7 should commit at least 25% of this future climate finance to forests. This is a very important piece. And on Brazil's side, of course, re-engaging with the Glasgow Declaration on Forest and Land Use, which Brazil is a signatory, but has not yet committed to join the Forest Climate Leaders Partnership. So this is another important opportunity because Brazil is already aiming to end deforestation here by 2030. This is precisely the goal of the FCLP. So why not? There are other arenas, the OECD, which is Brazil's trying to ascend, and so on. I won't get into details here, but it's very clear that there are opportunities to lead globally and as partners. And finally, regarding the cooperation beyond federal governments, there is already some cooperation or dialogue, at least between the US government and subnational governments in Brazil, particularly in the Amazon, through the LEAF Coalition and so on. And we would actually encourage this dialogue to continue. And moreover, we understand that climate finance should also be directed to local leaders, like Mauricio said. So this can be piloted through the USAID, but it's very critical that everyone understand that it will only be actually effective climate finance if it gets accessed by the local communities. And according to the Rainforest Foundation Norway, just to quote one information here, nowadays only 2% of the overall aid development resources, they get to the local leaders, they get to the ground. So that's very critical. We're talking not only about having different vehicles, but also, have the correct or the right instruments, the adequate instruments to really move forward, prioritizing the inclusion and access of indigenous and local communities in the Amazon and all over. So I'm going to stop here, but I'm curious to learn from the audience other questions and to interact. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Natalie. So we're going to go ahead and start addressing audience questions. The first is for Natalie and Mauricio. And then obviously, Meg, feel free to chime in as well. This is a political question. So governance without a majority coalition in Congress was a central challenge for Lula in his first two terms and contributed to serious legal and political repercussions. Do you have an idea of how Lula is thinking about this now? Can foreign assistance play a role?
I can start and then I can revert to Mauricio because he is more into the Congress than myself nowadays. But well, it's a chess game, and the good thing is that Lula is a very good player, right? A very good chess player. He knows very well the Congress, even this Congress, and he started the articulations very early. I would say even before getting elected, and not a coincidence. He supported and actually won two important battles in the Congress. I would say the most important one in the Senate. So re-electing Senator Rodrigo Pacheco as the Speaker of the Senate, and Lula has supported Arthur Lira as the Speaker of the House. So so far it's a very interesting scenario that doesn't guarantee anything for the environment or the climate agendas. Mauricio knows that well. But in terms of political articulation, that's looking interesting for Lula's leadership, I would say.
Yes, I could, talking about specifically environmental issues at the Congress, I think the challenge is not really is not easy, because, as I said, there are a lot of that some sectors are trying to approve. So in some bills, such as environmental licensing bill, I think that the government will need to talk about this this subject, and maybe we'll need to negotiate a better proposal for this subject. So I think there are some subjects that we will have a struggle, and will be very challenging. And other bills, I think it is easier to avoid its approval, such as this last bill that I commented, that will permit that mining and other impact activities be developed within indigenous territories. This is a bill from Bolsonaro government, so I think there's less possibility to approve this kind of setback. So I think we are, of course, facing some huge challenges, but I'm sure this situation is much better than if Bolsonaro were re-elected, because in this scenario, for sure, we possibly could see all of these bills approved, and I'm sure that its approval could erase all the efforts from Brazil and other countries to fight against deforestation and other problems.
Great, thank you so much for answering that question. I'll quickly note that a question came in wondering which organizations were involved in developing the recommendations that I gave an overview of at the top of the webinar. Just quickly, those are Earth Justice, Wild Heritage, Center for American Progress, Global Witness, Forest Trends, Natural Resource Defense Council, National Wildlife Federation, World Wildlife Fund, Wildlife Conservation Society, Foreign Policy for America, Stand Earth, Earth Insight, Climate Advisors, Environmental Investigation Agency, and Conservation International. And this was a primarily a US-based effort of US-based climate and forest experts. Great, so we'll now go to more questions for the panelists. Meg, there's been a question, what role do you think that technology transfer, and in particular Earth observation and biodiversity monitoring, should play in the US-Brazil relations under the Biden-Lula administrations? What's needed now and what's urgently missing?
That's a great question. And there are real technological hurdles involved with doing work, like I mentioned, with the Uruwawa in the Amazon. First of all, internet connectivity needs to be improved. And I think getting, the way that we had to do this with antennas and things like that, it's very expensive and one-off. So just improving internet connectivity throughout the Amazon would go a long way to empowering indigenous peoples and local communities for the protections of their lands and resources. Another big issue that needs to be addressed is energy. So we've had some really interesting pilot programs using solar energy in the Amazon. This is critical if we want to have forest-friendly livelihoods that rely on harvesting and management of natural resources, because you need energy in order to preserve those or refrigerate products like juices and nuts and fruits and things like that. So doing a big push on implementing renewable energy in local communities that rely on forest resources for their livelihoods would be a second potential area for US-Brazil cooperation.
Great. Thank you so much, Meg. We have another political question coming in. Does anyone, could someone say more about any specific announcements we should anticipate coming out of the Lula-Biden meeting on Friday? Is there an expectation from Brazil of additional U.S. commitments on finance for avoiding deforestation? If so, what can the Biden administration do on this front, given constraints on Congress? Natalie, I think you'd be well placed to answer that question. What do you see coming out of the meeting on Friday?
I think we can expect some overarching declarations and not specific deliverables. This is because the pledge has already been made in the past by Biden. So I don't think we should be expecting something different, but perhaps just a recommitment to that. And also, in addition, I think there is something about the two countries working together to really end deforestation in the tropics globally by 2030. So in line with Brazil's commitment and in line with the Glasgow Forest Declaration. That's what I think we can expect, but no specifics. And as I mentioned also before, this is not a meeting between the ministers. There won't be, just climate and forest on the agenda, but still, I think there will be a more high-level declaration, or so expected.
Okay, great. Let's go back to the Brazil Congress. We've got a question of Mauricio. Do you feel comfortable, or Natalie, do you feel comfortable maybe giving an opinion? How likely is it that these very disruptive bills that you outlined, Mauricio, how likely is it that they will pass? And also, why are these bills so detrimental to indigenous communities?
It is about the consequences of these bills.
How likely are they to pass, and how detrimental are they to indigenous communities? Yes.
Okay, as I said, I think all of these bills are very dangerous, and actually, some sectors are trying to disrupt 40 years of environmental legislation in Brazil. So, for example, environmental licensing is our main instrument to prevent deforestation and to prevent pollution in all way, and to preserve the health of society. These two bills about setbacks on indigenous rights, they're very, very dangerous, because, as you know, indigenous lands are the most protected areas, more than parks, national parks. So this is an example of how these communities play a very important role to preserve the forest. So these two bills aim to open these territories to more deforestation, to impact activities such as roads, mining, oil and gas, and all infrastructure activities. There are other bills, but I think actually we are making a huge effort to avoid its approval. As I said, I think there are some bills that will not go on this Congress, because the government is against them. But there are some subjects that I think the government and we from civil society will have to discuss, because the demand is very strong. So we will give our best to have good proposals, because these proposals that were approved at chambers of deputies in the last 2 years, they are the worst proposals on these themes. So they, by Bolsonaro administration, and because of the close relationship between the last government and the Congress, they achieved to approve the worst proposals ever. So I think we have a better scenario now to discuss these subjects, but of course it will not be easy. I think that one topic that is very important is this international view on Brazil. So now I think all this pressure from civil society and from international partners can make some good results to avoid the approval of these setbacks. I think there just a little chance to approve new and good bills, because I think our far right is very strong in the Congress. So I think we have to look to some bills that are important and that can promote environmental protection, but it will not be easy to approve them.
Great. Thank you so much for that update on the context in Brazil. So I'm going to try to combine some questions now, just so we can make the best use of time. So Meg, I have sort of 3 combined questions for you. First, broadly speaking, what does Brazil need to do to address the root causes of deforestation and forest degradation? Secondly, we've talked a lot about the Amazon. Could you kind of specify, how we can address deforestation and degradation in the Cerrado as well? And then lastly, would love to hear you give a little more detail on the Forest Act and why trade-related measures are important for addressing drivers of deforestation.
Sure. With regards to the first one, the root causes of deforestation and degradation, I'm sorry that Carlos Nobre wasn't able to join us today, because he has a really interesting proposal, Amazonia 4.0, which basically lays out a roadmap for sustainable development in the Amazon that is forest friendly and that will preserve the forest while allowing people that live in the Amazon to have livelihoods that can support their aspirations. So I think that is sort of the key, the underlying causes of deforestation and degradation. We can't just focus on stopping the negatives, so stopping the illegal deforestation and the deforestation. We need to propose a way forward for the Amazon, sustainable development in the Amazon that allows the forest to remain while livelihoods are supported. So I urge the webinar participants to look up Amazonia 4.0. Carlos would have been talking about it if you were here today. And the Cerrado, I'm glad you mentioned that too, Diana. It's a really important biome. It's the most biodiverse savanna dry forest biome in the world, and it's under extreme pressure from the expansion of soy. I am not an expert on the Cerrado, but I do know that the Traders Roadmap, which was released in Davos, WWF did not feel it was as strong as it could have been. And so we need to hold the traders accountable for their pledges to eliminate deforestation from their supply chains. This is something that the private sector needs to step up and really deliver on their pledges. And I think we need more protection in the Cerrado. There's not as much, if we're really going to, President Lula pledged not only zero deforestation in the Amazon by 2030, he pledged it for all biomes. So that includes the Cerrado. So we need to cut down on, we need to improve protection of the Cerrado and Pantanal biomes as well. So I think, did I cover all 3? Oh, the Forest Act. I think the Forest Act is critical here. We need to really get that moving in the new Congress, get it reintroduced, and build support for that. It's a now that we have the companion legislation for the EU, the US needs to take leadership here and do similar.
Great, thank you so much, Meg. So next we'll take a few finance related questions. So one, Natalie, on private finance, could you tell us a little bit more on what forms of private investment do you see development financial institutions, such as the US Development Finance Corporation, what forms of private investments do you see as being workable for helping to sustain the Amazon? Secondly, do you think the carbon market might feature in sustainable finance solutions, or and are there other types of sustainable financial solutions that you would suggest?
Thank you for the questions, very good ones. So first on the type of potential investments by DFC and other institutions, I think that connects a lot with what Meg said before, for instance, about connectivity infrastructure. That's exactly the type of thing that we need private investors to get in, especially development finance. So that's one example. We've been seeing a lot of enthusiasm around Starlink and deploying the best technologies that one would like to have anywhere in the globe, in the region, in the forest, by indigenous peoples and so on. So why not? So this is one example. Another example is solar energy or other kinds of renewables to really decarbonize and to free the communities from fossil dependency, which is exactly the case in the remote communities in the Amazon nowadays. Most of the monetary resources that they end up in the hands of those selling oil, diesel, and so on. So why not? That would actually tackle different problems at the same time. A third example is qualifying the hydroways and the river-based transportation in the region, also something that has not been done properly and sustainably yet. I'm talking more about the Amazon here, but that also extends to other regions. And finally, de-risking or leveraging risk capital for this new generation of startups that is emerging in the region. Nowadays, we are starting to see an ecosystem of new businesses emerging. We have accelerators like Hamas, and we have so many other players, other actors acting in the region. So they might have some opportunities in there. So I think the question is very welcome, and I think we have a lot of opportunities to discuss this in length if there's interest from DFC and others to really engage in that type of conversation with people on the ground. Then on carbon markets, I think we need to be clear on what kind of markets we're talking about here. In terms of like Brazil and Brazil meeting its nationally determined contribution targets for 2030, for instance, there is momentum, and there are proposals in Congress to reprice industry-related emissions, so not forest emissions, but industry and energy-related emissions through a cap-and-trade system. And Talanoa is one of the institutions that is pushing for that kind of approval as soon as possible. But then we have Article 6 mechanisms from the Paris Agreement still undergoing development. So we don't really know exactly what Brazil could use from the Article 6, but most likely not much before 2030. And that's also because, for instance, countries like the US mentioned that they won't be seeking the use of international transfers, the so-called ITMOs, to meet their own pledges before 2030. So there isn't much demand coming yet from that. So that means that what's available, I would say, are the voluntary markets, and that these markets, they engage local communities also in forest-related projects, both on removals, carbon removals, and emissions reductions or emissions avoidance. Currently, this is quite patchy. I couldn't say this is part of a strategy in Brazil, but actually there are also some problems in terms of safeguarding indigenous rights, local communities' rights when we talk about voluntary carbon markets here. That's not to say that they couldn't or shouldn't be used, but we still have a lot to do regarding achieving their maximum potential and not doing any harm. I hope that answers the questions, and thank you for them.
Yes, we have I think time for one more question, maybe for Mauricio and Meg, if we could just answer succinctly. So this is on illegal deforestation. First, do we know what percentage of deforestation is illegal in Brazil? And secondly, you know, we have a sense that the Lula administration is hopefully committed to tackling this. Is there a role that the US can play in helping Lula to tackle illegal deforestation, particularly on public lands?
Can I go first, Meg? Actually, also in the Congress, there is a bill that aim to legalize the stolen of public lands and the illegal deforestation within these lands. So this is a huge problem. There are very powerful sectors that want to approve this bill, and we are struggling to avoid this. This is a very important measure to avoid, because there were three other legislative measures in our history that gave this land to these people who has stolen these lands, and by the part of the executive power, I think it is very important to use this current legislation to go forward in this public policy to an effective regularization of this subject.
Yeah, I'd just compliment by saying 100% of deforestation on public lands in terms of in protected areas and indigenous territories is illegal. So that's a short answer to a complicated question. But I think, as I mentioned, rebuilding the capacity of institutions like IBAMA and ICMBio to carry out their functions in detecting and enforcing zero deforestation on these public lands is super important.
Great. Well, with that, it is, we have 1 minute left in the webinar, so I'm going to just thank the audience for attending, thank our distinguished panel for giving their expertise during the past hour. We will be sharing a link to the webinar to all of those that registered, so you'll be able to watch it again if you want, or watch it if you didn't manage to attend today. And for those of you who typed questions in the Q&A chat that we did not answer, we will do our best to follow up with the person who asked that question by email. So once again, thank you all for your interest in perspectives on US and Brazil cooperation on deforestation and climate. And I will draw the webinar to a close.